When you first start playing a game, obviously you aren't going to know exactly how to play. That's the first and most important job that the game has to do. You gotta teach your player how to play your game. Tutorials. I don't know about you, but every time I hear the word tutorial, I think boring and annoying. You definitely need to teach your player how to play your game, but it always feels like the thing that you have to do. I really can't stand having to sit through a bunch of text or dialogue to grasp the mechanics of a game. The thing about tutorials is that they're often far too complicated or too long for their own good. In fact, there are plenty of games that teach the player just fine without a tutorial. And I'd even go as far as to say that, well, I don't really understand why a lot of modern in-game tutorials even exist. Show, don't tell. It's a phrase I'm sure you've all heard plenty of times before, but how does it apply to games? Well, it's simple. Experience is always more valuable than explanation. In other words, it's much more enjoyable and interesting to the player if you teach them how to play through playing the game, rather than just telling them what to do. Take The Witness, for example. This game is all about solving puzzles by drawing a line on a grid, but even if you didn't know that, you can very quickly figure it out. All you have to do is click and drag. These puzzles get trickier as you go further into the game, but you're never told any of the rules to how these puzzles work. But you don't need them. And in fact, you wouldn't want to be told them because learning how to solve them is part of the game. There is no tutorial. The puzzles are designed to teach you how they work by solving them. Take this grouping of puzzles from the beginning of the game. At this point, all we've done is solved panels by moving from the start to the finish, so we've never encountered these black and white symbols before. Here's where the good design comes in. The first puzzle only has 3 possible paths that will get you to the end, and you're also most likely to draw a line right through the center, just because of the way that the puzzle is laid out. You start in the center, and you end in the center. It's the path of least resistance, and it also happens to be the correct solution. The next puzzle starts you off in a different place than last time, but looking back on that last solution, you can already make assumptions on how to solve it. Maybe I have to draw the line between the 2 symbols. Maybe I have to partition the 2 colors completely. The player asks questions, experiments, and learns. This one sequence of puzzles teaches you that you need to partition these colored symbols, that the shape and size doesn't matter, and that oftentimes there is more than one solution to the same problem. All of the Witness's puzzles are taught like this. You're given a puzzle that is nearly impossible to fail, and you will learn from that simplicity. As things get more complicated, your understanding of how each mechanic interacts with each other becomes more and more refined. A big part of what makes The Witness so special for me is being able to understand how its world works without someone explicitly telling me. The way that you learn about these puzzles, interestingly enough, is really similar to how they were designed. Jonathan Blow, the creator of The Witness, did a talk at IndieCade a while back, describing the process of designing the puzzle panels in the game. They weren't really ever supposed to be something specific. Each puzzle is just an idea, and the game is constantly building on those ideas and seeing how they interact. The puzzles are not designed in a contrived manner. Rather, each idea is relatively simple and needs little explanation. So, imagine the same scenario with the puzzles with the black and white squares. You walk up to this group of puzzles, but this time, a big blurb of text pops out telling you the rules of the puzzle. Well, I think it's pretty obvious how a lot of the magic is lost there. What once before was fun and interesting is now boring and, oh god, I have to read something. I understand that in certain cases, written instructions are pretty much absolutely necessary to teach your player how to play, because the mechanics are just, too complicated to do otherwise. But that's a whole nother video on its own. What I'm trying to say is, there's a reason why people relentlessly mash the A button to skip dialogue in video games. The same is especially true during the tutorial sections. It's because nobody wants to read that shit. I don't know about you, but I don't feel like having to stop what I'm doing to sit down and read a fucking encyclopedia on how to fish. Alright, time to go attack. Oh, yeah, that's a nice hit right there. Perfectly executed. Oh, did I see the numbers? You mean the massive, obvious, orange numbers that came off that dude's face? Oh, really? Because I could have sworn it was referring to how many brain cells you have left. Please don't. Fuck you. The thing is, people aren't stupid. You can easily teach them the mechanics of your game through good level design alone. I'm gonna use another example here, this time from Half-Life 2. In Chapter 5 of the game, you gain access to the gravity gun, one of the staple weapons of that game. If you didn't know, basically the weapon can pick up and launch various objects. After learning its basic mechanics, you then have to go through the ghost town of Ravenholm. In the first room of this area, you have to remove a saw blade from the wall in order to pass through this doorway. But as soon as you dislodge the blade with your gravity gun, a zombie waddles straight into your crosshairs. What have you done to zombies this whole game up to this point? Left click. And nobody even needed to tell you. Or take a look at this example from Portal.
One of the things we learned from Narbacular Drop, our student project that became Portal, was that players often thought portals took them into other spaces, or even other dimensions. To help fight that notion, we start players in a visually unique room with memorable objects, so that when they walk through a portal for the first time, they have a clear point of reference which communicates the idea that they're still in the same basic location. For instance, the radio, which is playing an instrumental version of Still Alive, helps as well by providing some audio continuity.
I think that, much like the example from The Witness, the best way to go about teaching mechanics is to give a challenge that's simple, so that you can expand on that mechanic without it seeming unfair or surprising. When you think about it, it really just makes sense. If you're going to introduce a new enemy into your platformer, imagine you throw out about 5 of these new enemies on the screen and the player has never seen them before. They're going to be overwhelmed and they're going to be understandably frustrated. What were they supposed to do against a crowd of this new enemy they have never seen before? Now, a much better way to go about doing this is to introduce this enemy as an isolated unit, with plenty of space between the player and that enemy. This way the player can, 1. See that the enemy is visually different, so therefore probably has different behavior than the previous enemies. 2. See how that enemy attacks and moves. And 3. Predict how to counter and beat that enemy. When you're given an opportunity to see and understand these things before actual consequences, subsequent encounters with this enemy type are going to feel a lot more fun and a lot more fair. In the end, it all comes back to show, don't tell. It's important to make the process of learning the game mechanics as fun and smooth as possible, and in the best case scenario, you shouldn't ever feel like you played a tutorial at all. Now, this may all seem too specific to be true, but the next time you pick up a game, I really recommend taking a look at what the game is doing to influence how you play. What you might notice is little tricks to guide your attention that you never even thought about before. Whether that be through the level design or the enemy placement, it really all depends on the game. If I wanted you to take anything away from this video, it's the power of the invisible tutorial. It's just that games that can teach their players through inexplicit means create a much deeper connection with the player, something rooted in the back of their minds, because even if they don't know it, they figured it out on their own, and that's deeply satisfying.